Okay, welcome back to this module. In this one, I would like to build a Linux EC2 instance inside the AWS Management Console. So let's get it started. So you have to log into your AWS console. We are doing technically the same thing. This time I'll go much faster because we've already built a Windows EC2 instance and we are ready to go. So we are almost familiar with some configurations. So I go to the All Services Compute part EC2. As you may know, you can also search here. You can put your, for example, EC2 here, and you can go to different settings through this search option that you have here. Well, it doesn't really matter from here or here. You can just click on EC2, and after going to the EC2 dashboard, one thing that I want to remind you is that on the right side up here, actually you can choose your region. Don't forget this because it's going to be different where you are spinning up your virtual machine or your EC2 instances. So I'm stick with the US West Oregon, which is US West 2, and you can see down here that the availability zones are 2A, 2B, and 2C, and I'm going to click on launch instances. So you have a bunch of options. You can, for example, you can select Red Hat, you can select different flavors of the Linux, but I'm going to stick with the first one, which is the Amazon Linux 2 AMI. So it's a customized Linux image for the Amazon. I'm going to select this one, and you can see we have 64 bits and for x86, and we have the 64-bit for the ARM. I'm going to select this one, and you can select which type of the instance you want to spin up, and I'm going to stick with the T2 micro, which it has one virtual CPU and 1 GB of memory. Storage is EBS only and it's not optimized, and the network performance is low to moderate. So I'm going to click on the next. In the step 3, which is the configure instance details, you can see you can tell how many virtual machine you want to spin up. For example, I can say I want to spin up 2 virtual machines. You can request a spot instance. We'll talk about this one later. And then you can choose which VPC you want to put your virtual machine in it, which is the default VPC for us. And the subnet, you can choose the subnet or you can leave as no preference. It means the AWS is going to put your EC2 instances one of these availability zones or subnets. Then you can say if you want to have a public IP address or not. We'll talk about all the details more, but technically it's the same thing as the Windows instance that we spin up. In the advanced settings, if I go down here, also we can put some text here, and it's gonna be the user data actually. When for example, if you've already worked with Linux machines, you know for example in Red Hat or in CentOS systems, we need to for example run yum update at the very beginning. You can put some commands here, for example yum update, or you can put some command like yum install httpd, for example, to install a web server. So there are some post commands that you can run after you spin up your virtual machine or your EC2 instance. So you can go through these settings. We'll talk about them more, but here is just we are going to create just for example two instances of the Linux AMI. And the meaning of this is that instead of running 2 virtual machine or 2 EC2 instances right now, well you can spin up one, and then based on the utilization of that virtual machine you can configure auto scaling, which we'll talk about it later. And technically it's just looking at your utilization, and it will spin up more and more virtual machines in case you need them. Anyway, so I'm going to select 2 here and click on next and add storage. And here, as you can see, for the root volume inside a Linux machine, we have a default 8 GB, and this SSD and number of the IOPS is shown here. You can add more volumes if you like, and but I'm going to stick to 8 GB for now. Click on the add tags, and again I want to emphasize again that the tags are really important. You have to make sure that you're putting tags for sure in your configurations. So I'm going to put for example owner here, and I'm going to set to ITrepo. And you can put a bunch of other tags also here. I'll mention later, but we are just doing everything manually. The best idea and recommendation is to create all of these configuration through an automation system like CloudFormation or Terraform. But anyway, I'm going to click on the next, going to the security group, and here is technically it's gonna be like a software firewall that we are going to attach to our EC2 instance. By default, if we have anything, we can select those ones, and you can see we have older security groups that we already configured, but I'm going to create a new one here, and I'm going to put the ITrepo -linux -sg for the security group, and I'm going to copy this one and paste it also to the description, so which we can have the same thing. And by default, SSH, which is a TCP protocol on port 22, is wide open from anywhere, which is not really recommended. You have to just change this one to your IP address or your network IP address based on your design and your architecture. But anyway, we have the warning also here. It says 0000/0. It means any IP address, which you can see it here. It's not recommended. Anyway, because this is just a test, I'm going to stick with these configurations and go to the review, and you can see the details here of the configurations, and we can just click on the launch. So when we are launching our instance, it's the same thing. For accessing to your EC2 instance, you need to have a certificate, technically public key and private key, and here we can download the key, and we can use this one to be able to connect to our EC2 instance. In the Windows configuration, if you remember, we use the key for technically decrypting the password for the administrator user, but in the Linux use case, we are using this SSH key for connecting to our virtual machine and SSHing to our EC2 instance. So I'm going to create a new one. So I put the ITrepo -linux key on the name, and I click on the download keeper. And you can see this is the key that I have already downloaded, and I can select on launch instance. So this is going to take some time. Well, we can click on the view instances, and we can see that 2 virtual machines are in the pending state. I'm going to pause this video and wait until these configuration are finished and the status is changing to green. These 2 virtual machines, and I'm going to select on the instance state to sort them based on the states. These 2 are running, and the way that the AWS configured for us is, so we selected the instance type T2 micro, but the availability zones actually are the same, so they configured both of them on the US West 2A. And the states are running, the status checks are initializing, but if I click on them, you can see the instance ID here, the detail that is running, availability zone, security group name, and the inbound rule. If I click here, you can actually see that it's port 22, open, wide open from anywhere, and outbound rule by default is open, wide to any IP address. So this is the AMI ID, it's the image ID, and this is the keeper name technically that we put on the key. And on the right side, the most important part is the IP address. So we have a private IP address for the internal connectivity inside the AWS, and we have the public IP address, which we can technically access to this IP address from anywhere from the internet. And you can see more detail about the VCP ID, subnets, and the network interfaces, and some more details here. So there are a lot of information, you can take a look at them. Also, if I click on the status checks, I can create a status check alarm to check how the status are. Monitoring, I can see the CPU utilization, disks, networks, packets in, packets out, and some other monitoring. And in the tag part, so this is a tag that I put in on my EC2 instance. We can add or edit these tags. And I'm going into the terminal. So for accessing to this to this EC2 instance, so what we can do is, like Windows EC2 instance, we can select this one and click on connect, and it will give you the information that you need to access. So right now, there are 2 options inside the AWS. One of them is you can actually use the SSH client, like if you are in a Linux client or if you are in a Mac, so you can use the terminal. It has a native SSH, so if I type SSH here and hit enter, you can see that I have the SSH client. If you're in a Windows machine, you can use different clients like PuTTY or Mobile Xterm or Super PuTTY, for example. Yeah, this is one of the options, and the other one is a Java SSH client directly from a browser. So, and you need to have a Java in your machine, and there are some pre-requirements, but you can run the SSH directly from the browser. So I'm going to stick with the first one, which it means that I want to SSH and use an SSH client to connect to my EC2 instance. And it says, okay, find an SSH client, like you can use, for example, PuTTY, and then you need the private key. The private key is actually this one. So we have the public key and private key. The public key is right now on the server, and private key is this PEM file with the PEM extension, and we can try to use this one to access to our EC2 instance. So it says your key must not be publicly viewable for SSH to work, and you can change the permission to remove the publicly accessible permission from it. And then this is your name or DNS name that you can access to your EC2 instance, which we got it from here. So, and the example that we can use is we can use the SSH client. With this -I, we are mentioning the private key that it's already on our system, and then space and IP address or the DNS FQDN of the server that we can access. So I'm going to copy this one for the purpose of this demo. Copy. I'm going to look at my private key to see where it is located. So it is in my download folder, and I'm going to copy this one. So I'm going to locate this file. It is actually in my home directory. So before doing anything, I'm running a pwd on my terminal. You can see I am in the user's ITrepo. If I run ls here, you can see that the key is here. So it's right now in the directory that I am working. So basically I can paste the command that I got it from the AWS console and hit enter. So for the first time, because this is the first time it's trying to add this certificate fingerprint to my known host file, so I'm typing yes. This is just a warning, and I actually want you to see this error. The error is just mentioning that well, the private key that we are trying to use is unprotected, and you can see it right now here. So we need to make sure that the file is not publicly accessible, and we can run this command to make the file a little bit more secure. So if I go back to the terminal, actually if I run ls-l and hit enter, you can see that this file, the permission is read write, and there's no execution, and again it's read, and again it's read. So, and I'm going to paste this command here, and actually put the sudo at the very beginning and hit enter. This is my password. And if I run ls-la again, now you can see that I removed every permissions from here except read for the current user that has access. It should has access to the file. So I am going to copy this command again, and this time it should be fine. So I'm going to paste it and hit enter. And as you can see, now we are inside the Linux machine. And as you can see here, the user that we try to log in is EC2-user. So whenever you're using any AWS resources, if it's a Linux machine, the user that you should access is EC2-user. So this is the user that we're trying to use. And you have the full access with this one. And technically you can run sudo su- for going to the root. And you can easily type, for example, yum update, and then you are updating any packages in that Linux instance. So everything is going to be up to date and to the newer version, and then you can start installing anything that you want. So I'm going to pause this video for a while to see how long this is going to take, and we'll come back and we can actually install something to do a quick test. So yeah, the update is finished. And just as an example, I can run yum install httpd, for example, and then I'm going to convert this Linux machine to a very, very simple web server. So the web server is already installed, and we can run, for example, systemctl command to start the httpd service. So the httpd service is up and running. If I go to my browser and copy this link again, if I go on to my browser and try to browse this website, you can see that it is just waiting and it is into connecting state. And I'm sure that you already figure out that what is the problem. The problem is that in our security group, we just opened port 22 and we haven't opened any port like HTTP or HTTPS. So this is the HTTP and we are trying to access to this server on port 80. So there is no rule inside this security group. If I go to this one, if I click it, it's just port 22. That's why it's just remain in the connecting one. So I'm going to the security group, click on this link here, and this is my security group, and I can easily go to the inbound property, hit edit, and I can add a rule for the HTTP traffic saying I want to open it from anywhere and save this one. So after doing this, if I go back to my URL and refresh this page, and actually I'm pasting it again, it should be fine. So let's give it some time. See here, I can see the test page of the web server on my Linux machine. So that was the Linux installation and a very simple web server. I hope you enjoyed this one and see you in the next one.